My story didn't begin the way I expected. On that Thursday and Friday, I was supposed to be in Denver for a financial summit, a trip I had been preparing for months. Normally, my husband Daniel would give me a warm send-off, the kind of farewell that reminded me why we had been together for so long. But that morning was different. He only gave me a distracted hug before leaving for work, his phone pressed tightly to his ear, his mind clearly elsewhere. Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Claire Donovan, though close friends often call me Clara. I'm 48 years old, married to Daniel for 23 years, and we share 2 children. Ethan, who's 21, and in his final year of college, and Lily, who just turned 19 and is trying to find her path in life. I thought I knew the rhythm of my family, but as you'll see, I was wrong. That afternoon, at exactly 3 o'clock, I left my office and headed straight for the airport. I've always preferred to arrive early for flights, just to avoid that panicked rush that so many travelers put themselves through. My flight was scheduled for 6 p.m., and for the first hour, everything seemed perfectly routine. I grabbed a coffee, settled into one of those uncomfortable terminal chairs, and waited for the boarding call. But as fate would have it, routine never lasts long. The weather in Colorado had taken a sudden turn, heavy winds and an approaching snowstorm. My flight was delayed by nearly an hour. When we finally boarded, I felt relieved, only to realize 30 minutes into the air that the plane was circling awkwardly. At first I assumed it was just turbulence, or a simple change in route, but the captain's calm voice over the intercom confirmed what I feared. Due to the worsening blizzard, we were heading back to our departure city. Back on the ground, exhausted and irritated, I rushed to the check-in desk to salvage what I could of my plans. By sheer luck, I managed to secure one of the final tickets for a flight the next morning. Still, I knew I'd already missed the opening day of the summit, something my boss wouldn't be happy about. I left a detailed message on his voicemail, and then called my Denver contact to explain the situation. By then, all I wanted was the comfort of home, even if just for one night. I dialed Daniel's number, hoping for the reassurance of his voice. But there was no answer. Unease prickled at me as I drove into our neighborhood. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something that made my stomach sink. Daniel's car was missing, though it was well past his usual return time. Inside the house, I dropped my luggage near the door and called out, but silence greeted me. Then from the living room, I heard faint voices. For a moment I thought he might have returned, maybe even had friends over. But when I entered, the truth was stranger. The television had been left on, though I was certain I had turned it off before leaving that morning. The room felt cold, unsettled, like a place recently abandoned. I clicked off the TV, my heart pounding, and began searching the rooms one by one. Nothing. Finally, I dialed Daniel again. This time he answered warmly, his voice calm, asking where I was, as if nothing was unusual. He said he was at home, relaxing, watching a show. For a moment I almost believed him. Almost. But the empty living room around me told a different story. I sank into the sofa, confusion gnawing at me. I wanted nothing more than to believe his words, to let fatigue wash over me, to rest in the safety of my husband's presence. But something about that night didn't sit right, and though I didn't know it then, it was the first crack in the world I thought I knew. I tried to hold on to the fragile hope of a peaceful night, the comfort of slipping into my own bed beside my husband, the reassurance that everything was fine. But within less than a minute, that fragile hope was shattered. The joy of returning home, transformed into a sharp unease that gnawed at me. Instead of anticipating Daniel's warm embrace, the embrace I had trusted and leaned on for 23 years, I was confronted by a revelation I couldn't quite name but already felt deception. It was a sudden jarring wound that left me speechless. The thought kept circling in my mind, like a vulture, was Daniel lying to me? And if so, why? There was no logic to it. I tried to imagine explanations, however thin. Maybe he had stopped at a bar with friends, maybe he was at a late dinner, maybe there was a harmless reason. But no matter how I turned it over in my head, it felt wrong. I must have been silent for too long, because Daniel's voice broke in, almost too cheerful, asking if I was still there. Snapping back into myself, I mumbled, "Yes, sorry, I just landed at O'Hare. I have to go." My voice cracked, betraying more than I wanted. Then I ended the call abruptly. The phone buzzed again almost instantly. I didn't answer, I switched it off instead. I needed stillness, silence. I sank into the couch, surrounded by the quiet of the house, my mind racing while my body felt strangely numb. Why would Daniel deceive me? The question became a drumbeat in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, he was planning a surprise. That possibility felt safer, kinder. My thoughts drifted back to our 20th anniversary, when I had woven an elaborate lie of my own. I had secretly arranged a week-long trip through the Mediterranean, and to pull it off, I involved her parents, her boss, and even a few colleagues. It was deception, but born from love. Could Daniel be doing the same for me now? But then another thought crept in, one I didn't want to allow. A darker one. Not us, I told myself. It couldn't be us. We're stronger than that. To shake it off, I did the only thing I could think of. I called Lily, my daughter. Her bright, familiar voice steadied me. I asked about her day, and she said she'd just finished some schoolwork and was watching TV. The normalcy of it almost made me weep. Then, carefully, I asked if she had spoken to her father recently, or if Daniel had mentioned any kind of surprise. She hesitated, then told me they'd had their usual weekend call on Sunday, but nothing more. I pressed gently, asking if maybe he was planning something special for me. She sounded confused. "Mom, your birthday was last month." Her words cut deeper than I expected. I laughed it off, gave her some weak excuse, and told her good night, but my heart sank. That flicker of hope, that Daniel was hiding something wonderful, died then and there. Possible explanations swirled in my mind, thin and desperate. Maybe it was work. Daniel had been chasing a promotion for months now, pouring late nights and endless energy into it. I thought maybe that was the reason for his strange absence. But even as I tried to justify it, the truth clawed at me. Promotions can't replace the time and closeness we were losing. I remembered all too vividly my own turning point years earlier, when I had been offered the vice president role at my firm. The money, the prestige, it was all there, but it would have demanded endless travel, weeks away from home, and I had said no. I had said no for him, for our children, for us. Daniel knew that story well, he had thanked me for it, and now, watching him sink deeper into his career obsession, I couldn't ignore the bitter irony. He was choosing ambition where I had once chosen family. The time we shared had dwindled to scraps, an hour in the evenings, maybe less, whole weekends when he was either gone, or too exhausted to even speak. The closeness that had once defined us was slipping through our fingers, and worse than all that, it had been weeks since we shared any kind of true intimacy. It was a painful truth that lurked at the edge of every day, and his absence that night pressed on that wound. Finally, I decided to strip away the guesswork. I picked up my phone and dialed his direct line at the firm. If he was working, his assistant or Daniel himself would answer. Instead, another voice came on the line. It was Jared, one of his younger colleagues. I froze for a moment, then greeted him by my nickname. Jared chuckled lightly and said something that made my stomach twist into knots. "Shouldn't you be enjoying your trip with Daniel right now?" A silence stretched too long on my end. I scrambled for words, quickly covering with a lie that I must have dialed the wrong number. Jared didn't seem to notice my strain. He casually mentioned that Daniel had promised him lunch for covering late shifts, complained about being stuck at the office at 9 p.m., then signed off without suspicion. The blood drained from my face. According to Jared, Daniel was on vacation, not at work, not at the office, not with me. The panic began to settle over me like a tightening net. Where was he then? With whom? My mind rebelled against the ugliest possibilities, but they forced themselves into my thoughts anyway. Could he really betray me? Could the man I had built my life with, sacrificed promotions for, raised children with, truly be lying about something so enormous? And then, unbidden, another memory surfaced. His sister Veronica. Once she had been practically family to me too. We had shared so much with her and her husband, holidays, birthdays, endless dinners, until the day it all cracked apart. That day, years ago, I had come home with a splitting headache. I collapsed on the sofa half dozing, when I heard Daniel and Veronica return from shopping. They hadn't realized I was there, and their conversation drifted toward dangerous territory. Veronica spoke first, teasing about a new manager at the grocery store, her tone playful, flirtatious. My heart pounded as I listened, waiting for Daniel's reply. He brushed it off, but Veronica pressed further, laughing about a reckless encounter she had with the man in the back seat of her car. Daniel, to his credit, scolded her, warning her she'd lose her husband if she wasn't careful. But Veronica only laughed again, smug and confident, saying she never got caught. They left soon after, leaving me in a storm of unease. That was years ago, and I had buried the memory deep, convinced it wasn't my problem. But now, with Daniel's absence gnawing at me, the old doubt came back to life. What if history had simply repeated itself, only this time, it wasn't Veronica gambling with her marriage? I sat frozen in the empty house, realizing I was standing at the edge of a truth I did not want to know. By the time Daniel finally came home that night, the kids trailing behind him with chatter and laughter, I felt a strange comfort. The memory of his sister Veronica's reckless boasting still haunted me, but I clung to the thought that at least Daniel had disapproved of it. That meant something, didn't it? Maybe that was proof that he wasn't like her. For now, I decided to set aside the storm raging in my head, at least until we could speak calmly, face to face. Later that evening, when we slipped into bed, I could no longer contain it. I turned to him carefully, as though testing the strength of thin glass, and began to explain. I told him about the memory that had surfaced, about overhearing betrayal so close to our circle. His expression wavered, uncertainty flickered across his face. I pressed on anyway, asking plainly, what should I do? If someone we loved had strayed, should I confront them? Should I rage, accuse, punish? Daniel took his time, weighing my words. At last he spoke slowly, cautiously, saying that it depended on the situation, that there were many factors to consider before acting. Unsatisfied, I pushed harder. I gave him a hypothetical. If our friend Marcus, Veronica's husband, had cheated, picked up a stranger in a bar, betrayed his vows, should we look the other way? The question hung in the room like smoke. Then, to my surprise, Daniel sat up abruptly, gripping his phone as though ready to call. His jaw was tight with anger. He muttered that someone needed to tell Veronica the truth, that she needed to know if her husband had betrayed her. I reached out instinctively, my hand gentle on his wrist, lowering the phone. "This isn't your burden," I told him softly. "If anyone should say something, it should be me." His eyes searched mine, torn between resolve and hesitation. Finally, I saw a grim acceptance settle over him. He whispered, almost to himself, that cheaters had no place in our home, no claim to our shelter. If Marcus had broken his vows, then he needed to live with the consequences, alone. With that, I dialed Marcus's number myself. My voice was heavy, my chest aching as I addressed him with the teasing name he'd once given me, his favorite sister-in-law. He chuckled faintly, reminding me I was his only one, then asked why I was calling so late. I inhaled sharply, then exhaled with resolve. There was no turning back. I told him what I had overheard, the careless confession, the infidelity. The silence on the other end stretched endlessly. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, full of disbelief. "Are you absolutely sure about Veronica?" I swallowed hard and confirmed it. I told him I had heard it from her lips herself, not shame, but bragging. My words cracked with sorrow, but I offered him whatever support I could. He thanked me quietly, his voice stripped bare, and hung up. When I lowered the phone, Daniel was staring at me. His eyes glistened. He leaned close, wrapped me in his arms, and whispered that he was proud of me, that I had done the right thing. I clung to him, scared and relieved all at once. Then, in the hush of the moment, I asked if we should encourage them to seek counseling, some way to repair what had broken. Daniel shook his head tiredly, his voice low. Once someone strays, Claire, they don't stop. I didn't argue, I only pressed myself closer to him, and let his words settle into the silence. Sometime in the night, the shrill ringing of the phone jolted me awake. Groggy, I reached for it, careful not to disturb Daniel. Veronica's voice exploded through the line, furious and trembling. She demanded to know what I had told Marcus. My heart thudded, but I steadied my tone. Calmly, I told her I had told him the truth, because he deserved to know. Her rage spilled over, disbelief that her own sister would betray her confidence. I countered firmly, telling her that betrayal had consequences, and this was one of them. That the truth, once spoken, cannot be swallowed again. Her fury broke into sobs then, raw and unrestrained. Between tears, she admitted Marcus had thrown her out. She begged me, begged us to take her in, just for a little while. My heart clenched at her desperation, but I knew what my answer had to be. Gently, I said we couldn't, that she had to face the storm she had brought on herself. When I glanced toward Daniel, seeking reassurance, his face was like stone. He leaned in and spoke firmly into the receiver. You can't stay here, Veronica, not after what you've done. Her sobs grew louder, but I ended the call. Then, together, Daniel and I sent her a final message. She was not welcome in our lives anymore. She was not to come by. She was not to call. For the first time that night, I felt Daniel and I aligned, united in resolve. He drew me close again, whispering how proud he was of my strength, and we drifted off to uneasy sleep. But the morning carried a new storm. Daniel's father rang, his voice harsh, lashing out at his daughter. I watched helplessly, as tears filled Daniel's eyes while she listened, her hands shaking. When the call ended, she was pale and broken. I reached for her, reminding her that this had been our decision, not just mine, that we had agreed on honesty, that we had stood together. But even as I tried to reassure her, a shadow of doubt lingered between us. I had only mentioned Marcus as a hypothetical, hadn't I? Yet it had led us down a path of real consequences. I asked her then, almost desperately, why was Marcus's betrayal unforgivable, yet Veronica's somehow excusable because she was family? Was blood enough to erase the weight of betrayal? Daniel had no answer. For the first time she was speechless, and in that silence, I felt the foundation beneath us tremble. Though Daniel had promised me he wanted nothing to do with his sister after the fallout, I knew the truth. He still met Veronica, in secret. It was an unspoken taboo in our marriage, something I never confronted directly, though the weight of it pressed on me whenever I suspected he had slipped away while I was out of town. Over time, Marcus, her husband, found his footing again. He rebuilt himself, even prepared for remarriage, and my own resentment toward Veronica dulled. Her absence had become a relief, even a joy. I stopped caring where she was, and I told myself that was enough. But still, unease clung to me. Sometimes when I looked at Daniel, I wondered if he carried guilt, not only for meeting her behind my back, but for deceiving me about it. I wanted to resolve it, yet found myself too tired, too wary, to push further. One night, exhaustion dragged me into a strange dream. I found myself standing under bright stage lights, before a vast audience at a medical congress. My voice rang out as I spoke of two kinds of people, those who deny what they see, and those who confront reality head-on. The hall was filled with faces, all watching, all listening. Suddenly, in the crowd, I saw David Milland, Daniel's boss, waving his arms, confessing with a smirk that he had evaded my wife. Then Jake Turnbull, sitting behind him, chimed in with his own shameless admission. Another man stood, tossing out a sly remark. The audience chuckled, a ripple of laughter moving like a current, and then, I jolted awake on the couch, a wet patch of drool on my cheek. Midnight. My heart pounded as I glanced around the quiet house. Daniel still hadn't come home. A cold thought seized me, maybe he was with Veronica. I hurried to the bedroom, but it was empty, no trace of him. My chest tightened. Should I call her? Should I demand to know if he was with her? The thought of asking for her address made me recoil. It would mean crossing a line, spying behind his back. Yet the urge gnawed at me. That's when I remembered something. A year earlier, After misplacing my phone on a trip, Daniel had helped me set up a locator app on both our devices. The icon still sat on my screen, unassuming but potent. My fingers trembled as I tapped it. Within seconds, the map appeared. Daniel's phone glowed on the screen, a blue dot blinking at Mills Lake. My stomach lurched. Mills Lake wasn't just any place. It was a community of exclusive estates, far beyond what we could afford. Veronica was practically drowning in debts. There was no way she could have bought into that world, so why was Daniel there? Confusion tangled with dread. As I zoomed closer, using satellite view, the blue dot was fixed inside the walls of an enormous property, its borders sealed by a high stone wall. My pulse hammered. What could he possibly be doing in such a mansion? The lake was an hour's drive from our town. My mind raced. Should I call him? Confront him immediately? No, he would deny it, twist it, maybe even laugh at my suspicion. I needed proof, evidence that couldn't be evaded. Grabbing my keys, I rushed to the car, berating myself for ignoring the signs, for refusing to see what had been in front of me all along. I should have checked the locator weeks ago. The drive was a blur of headlights and shadows. When I finally reached Mills Lake, my body thrummed with fear and determination. The massive gate to the estate loomed ahead, barring entry, guarded and imposing. I knew better than to drive straight in. I would be spotted instantly. Instead, I circled the road until I found a narrow path leading into the trees. My tires crunched on gravel as I parked discreetly, heart pounding as though it might burst from my chest. The wall stretched high and silent in the dark, but then it struck me. The estate touched the shoreline. If I approached from the lake, I might find a way to glimpse inside without being seen. I followed a faint trail to the water's edge, the night air sharp in my lungs. The waves lapped quietly against the shore. As I crept closer, pulling up the app again, I saw the glowing dot unmoved. Daniel was still inside. At last I reached a vantage point near a sprawling mansion. Its ground floor was mostly dark, but upstairs, several windows still burned with light. My gaze darted across the facade, until I spotted one curtain slightly open. A warm glow spilled out. Searching for height, I clambered up a sturdy tree, branches scraping my arms as I climbed. From there I peered into the illuminated room, and froze. A man stood inside, draped in a white terrycloth robe. His face was turned away, but he looked older than me, his body language casual, assured. Before I could study him further, he slipped from view. Moments later, another figure emerged. A woman. She walked lazily into the light, her robe open, a glass of champagne in her hand. It was Veronica. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Veronica was still beautiful at her age. That much was clear from the way she carried herself, robe slipping loosely from her shoulders, a glass of champagne in hand. The man I had seen earlier returned to her side, his hands roaming without hesitation. He plucked the glass from her fingers, set it aside, and pressed closer. My stomach twisted. I could no longer watch. Whatever this was, it wasn't love. No tenderness, no intimacy, no connection. Just a performance of lust, empty and hollow. For all my disdain toward Veronica, I still would not have wished such a life upon her. A woman chasing wealth in exchange for what little dignity she had left. I turned away, preparing to climb down, when something stopped me cold. Across the room, lounging on a velvet couch, sat Daniel. His robe hung open, his smile sloppy and drunk, and in that instant, I understood. He hadn't come here for Veronica. He had come here with her. The sight shattered me. My throat tightened as though I were choking on air. My grip faltered, and before I could steady myself, the branch beneath me snapped. I fell hard, crashing through limbs that scratched and clawed, until the ground knocked the wind from me. Staggering to my feet, scraped and bruised, I felt decades older in a single moment. It wasn't the fall that broke me, it was the truth. I wandered back to the car like a ghost, eyes burning with tears. For a fleeting moment, a reckless thought flickered to storm into that mansion, to drag them both out, to expose them. But reason quickly killed the impulse. Trespassing, assault, prison. My anger couldn't save me, it would only destroy me. so I forced myself to breathe, to think, what now? Divorce would be the simplest path. If we were in a no-fault state, with our own incomes, and no young children dependent on us, the courts would carve us apart cleanly, we would split what was ours, and I would finally be free of her. Yet some dark ember inside me demanded more. Not violence, never that, but something measured, something precise. Justice, revenge. Clutching my phone, an idea sparked. I dialed Daniel's number. Predictably, it went to voicemail. That suited me. I steadied my voice, painting the picture of a weary husband stranded by weather delays. "Hi, honey," I said softly, as though speaking from an airport lounge. "Just letting you know, our flight was diverted to Chicago because of the blizzard, but we're finally on the way back. I should be home in about 30 minutes. Don't worry if you hear my keys in the door." I hung up, certain the message would send her heart into a panic. She'd know I wasn't supposed to have phone access mid-flight. She'd hear the timeline, half an hour, and scramble. In her drunken haze, the fear of being caught might be enough to unravel her. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. Her voice was too quick, too bright. "Sorry if I woke you. I'm just heading home now, about an hour, maybe less." I murmured a tired okay, and let her end the call. Then I saw it, her car darting from the estate gates, weaving recklessly onto the highway. She was drunk, far worse than I'd realized. Swerving so violently, she nearly plowed into a ditch. My anger was eclipsed by something colder, fear. She wasn't just endangering herself, she was a danger to anyone unlucky enough to be on that road. Despite everything, she was still the mother of my children. I couldn't let her kill herself, or worse, someone else. Keeping a safe distance, I called emergency services. Calmly, methodically, I described the vehicle, a dark blue Ford Taurus, swerving erratically, nearly colliding with mine. I gave them the last digits of her license plate, the highway exit, the urgency. The operator assured me a patrol car was on its way. 2 exits later, I saw the flashing lights approach. From the bridge ahead, a cruiser shot forward, its siren piercing the night as it pulled her over. I drove past without slowing, a storm of relief and grief colliding inside me. 45 minutes later, I was home again, alone. The silence pressed in, heavy and absolute. It struck me then, the irony, the tragedy, that in a single night, the woman I had once loved so fiercely, had managed to destroy every bond that tied us. My love for her hadn't vanished entirely, but I knew now that love was no longer enough. There would be no mending this, no path back. The marriage was over, and in my own way, I had already begun to bury it. By shutting off the landline and silencing my mobile, I finally carved out a pocket of silence. Privacy was what I needed, to breathe, to think, to let the enormity of the last hours settle on me. I had spent so long hunting for explanations, piecing together fragments, convincing myself there had to be something more. But the truth had been there all along. The simplest answer: Daniel had betrayed me, and I had been too blind, too hopeful, to see it. Disgusted with myself, I uncorked a bottle of wine and poured heavily. For decades, I believed our love would mature like vintage, growing stronger, deeper, richer. Instead, it had soured into vinegar, bitter on my tongue. The ache that hollowed me wasn't only about Daniel's betrayal, it was realizing our love had long ago withered, leaving me clinging to an illusion. For 26 years, 24 of them as his wife, love had defined me. Without it, I felt stripped of my own identity, a wanderer adrift without compass or purpose. Could I go on without him? The thought gnawed until a darker one emerged. Maybe it would be easier to end the suffering entirely. A bridge, a deep river, a final silence. I had never imagined a life without Daniel. Starting over now felt impossible. Every decision in our home had always been woven around family, his comfort, the children's needs, our stability. I had bent my social life around them, rushing home from work events, dismissing casual friendships, anchoring myself solely to us. And now, there was no us, just me, staring at the wreckage, Loneliness pressed its cold hands against me for the first time. Why had he chosen deceit? Why seek another woman's arms, instead of granting me the dignity of truth? A divorce, though painful, would have honored our years together more than this cowardice. Did he stop loving me long ago, and simply wait for the children to leave before casting me aside? As the wine dulled the edges of my grief, my mind kept circling back to our children, Emma and Noah, our bright, beautiful kids, now adults beginning their own lives. They had once been the center of our universe, and in their presence, I felt the faint flicker of meaning. That night, they became my anchor, my saviors. Without them, despair might have dragged me too far. Thinking of their futures, families of their own, children yet to come, I could not surrender. If I could not live for Daniel anymore, I could at least live for them. The choice became clear. I could not stay. Every corner of the house reeked of his absence, his lies, the ghost of who we once were. I would always remember loving him, but from now on I would also remember him with someone else, and that was unbearable. My life had always been simple. I never craved excess. I was content with small comforts and the warmth of affection. That night, as I looked around at everything we had amassed, the house, the furniture, the trappings of a shared life, they felt meaningless. What did I truly need? Clothes, my car, my laptop. The rest I could leave behind like dead weight. At dawn, with clarity sharpening me, I moved quickly. In 30 minutes, I had packed bags and carried them to the car. The clock read just before 6, when I shut the trunk. Exhausted but resolute, I collapsed into bed for a brief rest. Daniel, likely sleeping off his drunken escapades, wouldn't stir until noon. By then I would already be gone. At 9, my alarm pierced through shallow sleep. I rose, booked an emergency consultation with a lawyer, then stepped into the shower. I scrubbed until my skin stung, as if washing away, not just dirt but the last traces of my old life. When I emerged, I slipped the wedding ring from my finger. My hand felt naked, trembling, but I set the ring on the table beside the phone like an epitaph. This was my clean break, my beginning, and though words felt futile, I still owed him a final expression of truth. So I sat, pen in hand, and began a letter. Daniel, it breaks me to write this, but I cannot close my eyes to the truth any longer. The man I loved has chosen a path of recklessness and empty indulgence, and in doing so, he has abandoned the vows we once held sacred. The ink bled into the page, as if carrying part of my pain with it. You often drift alongside your sister, Daniel. Perhaps it is some inherited weakness, a family curse. By the time you read these words, I will already be gone, completely erased from your world. Our paths will never cross again. The depth of your betrayal has left me reeling in a torment I never imagined possible. And yet, even as I grieve, I cannot deny the 24 years of happiness we once shared, or the 2 beautiful children you gave me. Out of fairness, I will keep this farewell brief. May you return quickly to the arms of your chosen companion, and may you find in her what you abandoned in us. As for me, I thirsted for justice you never had the courage to give. Did your indulgence in infidelity fill that void? Did it grant you revenge, or simply fleeting pleasure? The man whose mansion you shared was clearly wealthy. The grandeur of that estate spoke louder than words. I no longer wish to see you. I no longer wish to hear your voice. There is nothing left for us to discuss. Our lawyers will handle everything from here. Sign the divorce papers swiftly, and let the last tie between us be cut clean. The reason behind it all no longer matters. You chose, and in choosing, you ended us. By 10 in the morning, my path was already set in motion. At the bank, I methodically dismantled the life we had built together. I paid off our shared credit card balances, closed the accounts, and made sure there were funds left behind to cover the mortgage and utilities for 2 months. Then I severed my name from the joint account and walked out holding a check for nearly $250,000, the sum of our savings and securities. Before noon, I appeared at my workplace, startling my boss, who thought I was still in Minnesota. His shock deepened when I announced my resignation and immediate relocation. Our relationship had grown over the years into more than a simple employer-employee dynamic. He had once stayed in his position because I declined a promotion, a sacrifice that later, during his own divorce, I confessed was for his benefit. Since then, we had worked as near equals, sharing trust instead of hierarchy. When I told him I was leaving, he did not fight it. Instead, he offered me something unexpected, a position in their newly formed optics division in Tucson. The salary would be lower, but the cost of living was far more forgiving. With a handshake, we sealed the agreement, and he promised to spread the word that I had left of my own choice. Next came the lawyer. He had known me for years, both as a client and as a friend. When I told him I wanted divorce papers drawn immediately, and Martha given the authority to sell the house, he tried, gently, earnestly, to persuade me otherwise. But when he saw the steel in my eyes, he understood. My course was set. By midnight, I would be gone. Another city, another state, no longer a wife. By late afternoon, exhaustion overtook me. I found an old roadside motel, checked in with cash, and collapsed. That evening, with a disposable phone I had purchased, I called Noah first. My voice shook as I told him it was my new number. When he asked if I'd spoken to his father, I told him the truth. I had discovered Daniel's betrayal only the day before. There was silence, then a low murmur of disappointment and disbelief. "What will you do now?" he asked. I told him everything. I had packed, closed the accounts, resigned from my job, and was heading south to start again. I said his father would receive the papers by the end of the week. Noah asked if Emma knew, and I confessed she did not yet. I promised to keep him updated, to call often, and to take care of myself. He whispered that he loved me, and I choked back tears, as I told him I loved him more than anything. After that call, I dialed Emma. Her voice trembled with confusion as I told her what had happened. Her heartbreak was raw, unguarded. She asked through tears, "How long has this been going on? How long weren't we enough for him?" I wanted to shield her from the cruelty of answers. "The how and the why don't matter anymore," I said softly. "What matters is that I loved him with everything I had. I trusted him completely, and he shattered that trust. That's all you need to know." I promised her she would always have a place with me, that once her school term ended, she could come live with me in Tucson. My tears came freely then, but with them a fragile strength. Tucson greeted me with unexpected warmth. The optics division was small, barely 30 employees, but their camaraderie was genuine. The district manager treated me not as a subordinate but as a colleague, and the kindness of that community steadied me when my heart faltered. Within a month, I had chosen a modest yet lovely house in a condominium, and slowly began building something like a life again. Through it all, I had no direct contact with Daniel. My lawyer handled the exchanges, my children gave me their quiet updates. It was better that way. But then came a twist I had not anticipated. Daniel resisted. He wanted to contest the divorce. He vowed to fight it, even if it destroyed us both financially. When my lawyer relayed this, expecting me to be enraged, I surprised him. I told him to let it go, to stop pushing, to give Daniel the chance to rebuild whatever life he thought he wanted. I had loved him once, deeply, fully, and for that reason alone, I could not bring myself to crush him now. The 24 years we had once shared, however fragile their memory had become, still deserved that much grace. I instructed my lawyer to make it very clear, I had no desire to continue my relationship with Daniel. I told him to wish Daniel a good life on my behalf, and then in a moment of raw honesty, I added a sharper request, tell him to go to hell. My lawyer, who had been with me through every legal and emotional step of this separation, raised an eyebrow, then chuckled. "I can deliver that message with pleasure," he said dryly, "but it will cost you an extra $150. Conversations with my children proved far harder than any courtroom negotiation. One by one, I had to help them understand that there was no path back, that reconciliation wasn't possible. The first stumbling block came when Emma called, her voice trembling. "Mom, Dad completely freaked out when I said I planned to live with you this summer. I promised her I would find a way to visit her and her grandparents, even if it meant traveling more often, but her shaken tone unsettled me so much that I stepped away from my phone for several days. The next challenge came with Noah. He decided to divide his summer between the two of us, which only worsened Daniel's mood. I consciously avoided asking questions about Daniel's behavior. I was done peering into that abyss. My focus had to be forward. And yet I couldn't pretend my emotions had evaporated. Fragments of what we once had, those decades of shared laughter, struggle, intimacy, still clung to me like echoes in a house I no longer lived in. Through my children, I learned that Daniel was unraveling. He had sunk into a depression as deep and consuming as the one I had endured when his betrayal first came to light. I could hardly believe it. The pattern was so familiar, it was exactly what had destroyed his sister Victoria. When you betray someone, you crush the people you should love most. You shatter the foundation of your marriage, and then, you expect to carry on as if nothing happened. But Daniel? He could not carry on. He lingered in denial. His refusal to divorce wasn't a sign of love, it was an escape from reality, a shield to keep him from facing the truth that his actions had ruined us. For a few hours, I almost pitied him. But then I realized, he had been living in denial for nearly 2 years already. Even as Noah and Emma stayed in regular contact with me, Daniel used them as messengers. Through them, he whispered his remorse, his pleas, his claims that he would do anything to prove his love for me. My children hoped for reconciliation, but I could not give it to them. I refused to reopen the wound. The distance between us was already a battlefield for them, forcing them to choose between their mother and father. Daniel was relentless, pressing Noah and Emma for my whereabouts. All he knew was that I had moved somewhere in the south. I had kept my life carefully shielded, but nearly 3 years after I left, he discovered where I was. One evening, leaving work, I saw him. His figure lingered near the office building, waiting. My stomach clenched. I had gone to great lengths to keep my address private, but somehow, he had found me. Based on what the children had told me, he believed that a face-to-face encounter would be enough to change my heart. He was wrong. I ducked through a side exit, pulse racing, and called Louise. She was my closest friend in Tucson, someone who had stood beside me through everything. Together, we devised a simple plan. I deliberately walked back into Daniel's line of sight, letting him see me, then got into my car. I drove slowly, weaving through the city, even stopping at a grocery store, until I pulled into my neighborhood. Daniel followed. When I parked, Louise was waiting. She opened the front door before I even reached for my keys. In her arms, she held her daughter, my goddaughter, a bright-eyed 1-year-old, who had become like family to me. At that very moment, the doorbell rang. Louise, cradling her little girl, opened it. Daniel froze in the doorway. His eyes darted between Louise, her accent-laced greeting, and the baby's tiny hands reaching out toward me. From my place in the kitchen, I picked up the child and kissed her hair, letting him see what he needed to see. Louise glanced at me knowingly and said, "Take care of our little one, while I finish dinner." Daniel's expression collapsed into shock. He had expected contrition, or hesitation, or perhaps even longing. Instead, he found a home that was not his, a family that was not his, and a woman who was no longer his. "Well, well, well," I said, stepping forward with the baby in my arms. My voice carried both irony and steel. "What exactly is it you want after almost 3 years, Daniel?" His reply came in a broken whisper. He said he needed to apologize, that he was sorry for the pain he had caused me. He admitted it was not my fault, but his foolishness. He said I had been the best wife, the best mother, that he had been blind and reckless. His tears betrayed him. For a fleeting moment, his words stirred something in me, but I could not allow this illusion to live. It was time to end it. "It's all right," I said calmly, with a smile that did not quite reach my eyes. "As they say, it's all in the past. I haven't dwelled on those memories in a long time. I forgive you." I looked down at the baby, her laughter, her warmth, and added with finality, "And I wish you a joyful life, Daniel, filled with love, just as mine is now." Daniel's face broke. Tears spilled as he mumbled something I could not hear. He stepped forward, embraced me quickly, and then rushed out into the night, broken and silent. I closed the door gently. Louise emerged from the kitchen, her eyes meeting mine. She could see the storm still churning inside me, and with quiet sadness, she simply placed a hand on my shoulder. Relief and sorrow blended together in the silence of that moment. Louise gently took little Sophia from my arms, sensing I needed a moment to collapse into something softer than strength. I leaned against the closed door, the tears I had fought for so long finally slipping free. Without hesitation, she wrapped me in a warm embrace and pressed a gentle kiss to my forehead, steadying me with her quiet strength. With a resolute look, she picked up her phone. "I need to let Horatio know I'll be heading back home with our daughter soon," she said, with a warmth that steadied the chaos inside me. "Thank you, Louise," I whispered, my voice trembling with sincerity. I meant it, not just for this moment, but for the years she had stood beside me. Before leaving, I reminded her, "Tell Horatio, I'll be waiting for you both at the barbecue on Saturday." Her smile lit up the room. "Absolutely, boss, and I'll see you at the office tomorrow." The following week, my lawyer placed the signed divorce papers on my desk. Daniel had finally relented. A strange calm washed over me, not triumph, not joy, but release. I continued to move forward, cautiously. I allowed myself to form new connections. A few friendships blossomed into something tender, though I refused to let any grow into deep commitments. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of men. The nervousness, the timidity that betrayal had carved into me began to fade. And with that growth, I wondered if it was time to let Louise introduce me to someone she trusted, a man who could bring genuine happiness into my life. But then doubts arose. Not doubts about leaving Daniel, no, that was unshakable. But doubts about the encounter I had allowed. For years I had told myself we had nothing left to discuss, that he already knew exactly where I stood on infidelity, and how I would react if betrayed. Yet hearing fragments of his remorse, seeing his brokenness, forced me to wonder if avoiding him had been a mistake. Still, one truth remained: removing myself from his life had been the only way to survive. Distance gave me space to heal, to find peace away from the poisoned atmosphere his betrayal had created. Had I encountered him earlier, had he begged forgiveness before time had hardened my resolve, I might have faltered. I might have let him back in, only to face new heartbreak, new ruin. Now, 3 years later, his apology, raw and belated, gave me something unexpected: closure. It loosened the last chains of grief I had carried, and opened the faintest door to the possibility of loving again. Whether I would ever tell him that the child he saw wasn't mine, I wasn't sure. I owed him nothing anymore. The choice to reveal or to conceal was entirely mine. For the first time I felt unburdened, free. But peace, as I learned, never lingers long. Yesterday, I stood by Daniel's grave with Noah, Emma, and dozens of relatives. Victoria was there too. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched my children, but Victoria's eyes remained dry, her face a mask of unreadable calm. Daniel, in his despair and drunkenness, had met a violent end in a late-night crash. No chance for rescue, no chance for one last word. His story was over. I couldn't help but linger on the bitter twist of fate. Why had Victoria urged her brother toward betrayal all those years ago? Why had she whispered poison into his life, steering him into the arms of someone else? After long reflection, I found only one answer: revenge. Revenge for the day Daniel and I had revealed her own infidelity to Mike, which had shattered her marriage. Perhaps now, as she stood unmoved at her brother's casket, she felt her revenge complete. But me, I felt only a hollow ache. I know one thing with unshakable certainty: I will never love any man the way I once loved Daniel. That chapter, flawed, beautiful, devastating, is forever closed.